So as we look at this situation with democracy on the part, it appears to us, and I think it is as a fairly obvious attempt to get around Wisconsin's requirements for absentee voting. That in fact what this was an attempt to have something other than the absentee voting that we have in our state. In effect, it was in-person voting going on during 2 days well in advance of the deadline that is set by the statute. Now, if you look at what happened here, the details are really fairly well known. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that. There were over 200 sites around the city. And we've submitted an affidavit of Mr. Hudson, which just attaches a number of documents which are readily available out there on the internet about the event. For example, to the Biden campaign, there was little doubt that this was in fact simply an opportunity to have advance voting, not some sort of specific absentee as required. Here's the ad, which is in fact attached to
Hey Madison, this year, voting early is a walk in the park, literally. On Saturday, September 26th and Saturday, October 3rd, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., City of Madison poll workers will be in over 200 city parks, registering voters, answering questions about voting, and accepting your completed absentee ballot. Absentee voters who still need to find a witness can just bring their blank ballot with them and have a poll worker serve as their witness. Poll workers will be wearing bright yellow vests and can be found by one of the vote yard signs you are used to seeing at your polling place. So make your plan now to return your ballot. Democracy in the Park, Saturday, September 26th or Saturday, October 3rd, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at any of the 200 plus city parks in Madison. Visit cityofmadison.com to learn more. That's cityofmadison.com.
I'm Joe Biden, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Biden for president. This event is hosted by the City of Madison and is nonpartisan. All are welcome. Hey, Madison.
So the question, and you're taking ballots, you're registering voters, you're helping them complete envelopes, you're instructing them on ballot processes, you're witnessing those who vote. All of those are attributes of in-person voting. The exhibits that are attached to the affidavit of Mr. Hudson simply illustrate that fact. And I don't think, that, again, that there's much debate about what in fact went on there. The sole question for the board, and ultimately for all of us, is whether or not they could do that. And we heard from Michael, a fine attorney, about this. But if this is in-person voting, then it's governed by section 6.855 sub 1 of the statutes. That statute provides quite explicitly that if you're going to have multiple voting, if you're going to have a voting location with clerks, with the clerk's offices, you must have the governing body, for example, authorize it. That did not happen here. The City of Madison did not authorize it. There was no vote by the Madison City Council. You have to be as near as practicable to the clerk's office. That didn't happen here. You had 200 sites. That certainly wouldn't be the case. And the statute requires, in fact, that you can only have one site. So 200 sites doesn't comply. So I think it can be accepted that if this is in-person voting, if this satisfies those requirements, and certainly the Biden campaign thought it was that, then it cannot comply with the statute. So the only question for the board is whether or not that section applies. That is section 6.855. It does. It does. Let's look at the exact wording of that statute. It provides the governing body of a municipality may elect to designate a site other than the office of the municipal clerk or board of election commissioners as the location from which electors of the municipality may request and vote absentee ballots and to which voted absentee ballots shall be returned by electors for any election. Well, electors. It says electors. Why does it use the plural electors? Because it's an invitation for anyone from the public to come to this place. That's dramatically different than the explanation we just heard, which is that somehow a single witness could accept these. That's not what happened here. They invited all electors to come. This was a move of the office of the municipal clerk to 200 separate locations when this statutory provision says you can't do that. I don't think there's any debate. You can't do that under this statute. So then the second question you ask, well, obviously it was an attempt to move the entire office there, but what activities qualify? What activities make it subject to this statute? Again, it's fairly obvious. It says quite specifically that it's an activity covered by this statute when it is a place, quote, to which voted absentee ballots shall be returned by electors for any election. Well, everybody agrees that's exactly what this did. You could return your absentee ballot to this location, sponsored by the city for these. So it clearly met the statutory obligation. But we don't have to rely just on that statute. If we look deeper and ask the question, how do we vote absentee in Wisconsin? There's a specific statute again on that. It's 6.87, sub 4, sub B. That's a provision of the statute that provides how you return ballots. And here's what it says. It says there are two ways to return your ballot. The envelope shall be mailed by the elector or delivered in person to the municipal clerk issuing the ballot or ballots. That's exactly what you did here. At most, you had the second item, delivering it to the clerk. But you couldn't do that because then you're governed, if it's a clerk's office and you're delivering it to the clerks, they could not receive it at 200 locations. The statute said you can only have one. Or alternatively, if you think about the statute, that it's consistent with the overall view of absentee voting. That absentee voting is done in advance, independently of the clerk's office, independently of those events, so as to avoid undue influence and the like. So if this was to the municipal clerks, it violates the provision that restricts you to one office. If it's not to the municipal clerk, that if it's something like what Mr. Haas said is delivery to anybody, well, that's not even allowed. There's no provision in the statute that allows it. There's only two ways you can bring these. It's not one of those. So it's either the municipal clerk's office, and therefore invalid, or it's otherwise, and that's not even authorized in the statute. So it all makes sense if you consider that we are not an advance voting state. That is not what we are. We are an absentee voting state. One last comment I think I would make at this point, which is that the commingling of the ballots from that day with all of the other ballots was extraordinarily inappropriate. Now, I don't have evidence as I stand here that this was a coordinated effort to avoid our ability to identify the ballots that were cast on that day. But everyone knew this was controversial. Council already said that. And yet they did nothing to allow us to be able to identify these ballots for later consideration. Under those circumstances, it seems to me the city's at fault and the relief eventually that one ought to get for this has to be directed at the entire city. That's unfortunate, but it's a consequence of the city's own behavior. Thank you.
Attorney Troupas,
Yes.
just a
Yes.
quick question. For this board, what relief are you asking?
I'm asking that those, that 17,271 ballots be drawn down in the city, or that we come up with some other form of relief if we can identify those ballots that were cast that day. You have two separate sets of ballots. You have those ballots that are, I think, readily identifiable as having been witnessed by the clerks. And for that group, we could, in fact, discern that today or at a future date by simply looking for clerks and their signatures on them, and we could ultimately determine the number that were, in fact, witnessed on those days. As to the secondary group, I have no method by which they can be identified. So we're left with relief to the whole city, with at least as to regard those. And again, those are the statutory methods. I'm not predicting there might be others. I just don't have any for you.